remember the last real conversation I had with David. It ended with him giving me a smug little wink, saying, "You need to stop falling in love with the fine print, kiddo." That was the same afternoon I flagged a discrepancy of $2.3 million in client payments that didn't have any projects attached. He just laughed it off, called it creative accounting, and clapped me on the back like I was a loyal dog who had brought him a squeaky toy. I just smiled back, my lips a tight, thin line, and went back to my dashboard with the same quiet fury I used to take on a particularly stubborn bug. I was meticulous, patient, and ready to break the system if necessary. I took pride in the kind of integrity that kept you up at night but let you walk into the office without shame. I didn't need validation. I was the firewall. At 29, I was the person people on the dev team referred to when they wanted to know if a security protocol was real or if someone just made it up to delay a launch. My email signature didn't say best or cheers. It said per protocol. That was my creed. I didn't have much of a social life. I was too busy with penetration tests and breaking down system architecture into digestible chunks for executives who thought blockchain was a type of spreadsheet. My desk was a command center, and a Zen garden had a baby. There were color-coded Post-it notes with initials, a small succulent named Satoshi that only got watered after a successful code freeze, and a mess of cables. Maybe you're thinking, why the hell do I care about some tech nerd in a hoodie? Fair. But here's the thing. I was a digital janitor, the person who saw the dirt behind the sleek facade. I had been David's protege since I was 22 and still afraid of command line interfaces. He was always just charming enough to be disarming, but never so present that you could pin him down. He loved to tell the board I was the brains while he was the vision, which was code for she works while I play golf. He was always dangling something in front of me, more stock options, a promotion to lead architect, maybe a future CTO role if I played this right. But it always came with a shrug and a smile and a quiet dismissal of my concerns, like when I raised my hand about that transaction log out of the company's Dubai office last fall, and he said, "You have to stop thinking like a junior engineer and start thinking like a leader." Translation, shut up and let it slide. Still, I felt valued, not seen maybe, but useful. I was the fixer, the one they called when a server audit was about to cause a panic, or someone from the legal department threatened to quit. I once rewrote a 58-page security protocol over a single weekend because David asked me to simplify the language before the investors' retreat. I didn't even charge overtime. I just wanted to be needed. So, when the end came, it wasn't with a warning. No whispered rumor, no calendar invite with a skull emoji. It was just a regular Monday morning stand-up at 9:00. David asked me to hang back after. "Quick thing," he said. He brought me a coffee like he always did, black, just how I liked it. Then he told me I was no longer aligned with the team's vision. He used words like inflexibility and friction, like I was a faulty gear in a well-oiled machine. He said there had been feedback, anonymous of course, that I was too difficult, that I made others feel micromanaged, that my obsession with details was getting in the way of momentum. I just stared at him, coffee untouched, my fingers cold. In a weird way, I was embarrassed for him. The performance was so rehearsed. It was like watching a magician pull a dead rabbit from his hat and pretend it was a dove. I nodded, stood up, thanked him for the opportunity, and left the mug on the conference table. It felt like walking out of a crime scene, one I hadn't realized was mine until the sirens started. By noon, my company login was disabled. By evening, my name was wiped from the org chart. I didn't cry. Not yet. I did what anyone with nothing left would do. I opened a bottle of red, ordered something greasy, and sat on my floor, surrounded by piles of old server logs and project binders, as if proximity to my life's work would anchor me. The silence in my apartment had weight. It wasn't grief. Not yet. It was something worse. It was disbelief. It was the word inflexibility that did it. David had said it with that trademark blend of fake compassion and gentle condescension that made me want to lob my keyboard at his fancy watch. He folded his hands like a priest breaking bad news and said it again. Your approach is too inflexible. It creates unnecessary friction with the team. Friction. The same team that once emailed me in a blind panic because someone had accidentally forwarded a server with 3 years of unredacted user data to the wrong client. The same team I'd covered for during the Q3 disaster when someone mixed up deferred revenue with actual cash on hand and almost triggered a board audit. But yeah, friction. I sat across from him, hands on my knees, back straight in that stiff, ergonomic chair they said promoted collaboration. The door was closed, no HR rep in sight. Just David basking in his own performance like some off-Broadway narcissist playing the role of compassionate boss. Just want you to hear this before you see it on paper, he said, like that made it noble. You've been an invaluable part of this company. No one's questioning your intelligence or your work ethic. My throat tightened. I stayed silent. Let him keep talking. It's just, we've had some feedback, and not just from leadership. He looked down at the folder in front of him like it was a script. There's been a pattern. Comments about your communication style. A sense that your attention to detail has become, frankly, a source of stress for others. He said that word stress, like it was a nail I'd been hammering into everyone else's forehead. So, he continued, flipping the folder shut for dramatic effect. We're going to have to part ways. That was it. No discussion, no performance review, no mention of the 79-hour workweek I'd logged the previous month, trying to reconcile a buried vendor invoice from Singapore that I knew didn't match their transfer logs. I see, I said, my voice somehow steady. It's not personal, David offered, and I almost laughed. Of course, it wasn't personal. It was corporate. Worse, it was sanitized, sterilized. HR scented betrayal in a silk tie. I knew this language. Realignment of priorities. Structural evolution. It all meant the same thing. Get out before you notice something you're not supposed to. I'd be happy to write you a letter of recommendation, he added. I stared at the coffee he'd handed me earlier. It was lukewarm now. I wondered how long he'd practiced this, if he timed the speech, if he'd rehearsed that particular head tilt in front of a mirror. How long ago did you decide? I asked. David blinked, caught for half a second, then smiled. Been a conversation for a few weeks now. Weeks. So while I was staying late finishing the security checklist for the Global Partner Summit, he was lining up my exit like a polite guillotine. I stood, not too fast. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of looking shocked. Okay, I said, my voice clipped and calm. I'll clear my files today. Let me know where to send the company laptop. David nodded, already moving on. We'll handle it. And again, I really do wish you the best. You're incredibly talented, Ariana. Just maybe try to soften around the edges. Soften? I turned and left without another word. As the door clicked behind me, I realized my legs were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. In the elevator, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls. I looked the same. Black hoodie, simple glasses, hair in a messy bun. But something had cracked inside me. I wasn't just unemployed. I'd been erased, fired for doing the job better than the people who wrote the rules. I stepped into the parking garage like I was walking away from a crime scene. The air was stale, heavy with exhaust and silence. I unlocked my car, sat in the driver's seat, and put both hands on the wheel. My fingers were white from the grip. I didn't start the engine, just sat there, my eyes burning, teeth clenched. David had always said I was the kind of person who could spot a flaw buried under 10 pages of legacy code. Funny, I'd finally missed one. And now I couldn't stop wondering what was so dangerous that he had to get rid of me. I had never cried in front of my coworkers, not when my appendix ruptured during Q1 filings, not when my dad died mid-audit season, not even when the office internally erased 3 weeks of reconciled ledger data and I had to rebuild it from scratch over a single weekend. But now I cried on my couch with Cheeto dust on my pajama pants, my laptop balancing on one thigh, and a half-filled spreadsheet of compliance roles near me flickering on the screen like a cosmic joke. I'd applied to 17 jobs in 40 minutes. Compliance assistant, risk associate, even one godforsaken position titled regulatory happiness coordinator. What the hell was that? A glorified mascot for tax laws? Every cover letter read like it had been written by a robot hopped up on Xanax. I didn't believe a word I was typing. I am passionate about protecting corporate integrity, felt like an obituary to my soul. Between applications, I stalked David's LinkedIn. Still there, still smug. His banner photo was him giving a tech talk titled Leadership Through Adaptability. I stared at it for so long my eyes blurred. Adaptability, right? More like managing up while covering up. The wine bottle on my counter was empty. The leftover pad thai was cold. The day had warped into this sad little purgatory of disbelief and seething clarity. It was humiliating, yes, but more than that, it felt off. I'd walked off stage halfway through a performance and realized the script I was handed was never the real story. After hours of this emotional demolition derby, I did what I always did when the world spun too fast. I cleaned. Not just dishes, not just laundry. The neurotic data analyst purge that could have qualified as therapy in some circles and war crimes in others. My home office, once a temple of order and color-coded dreams, became ground zero. I pulled open drawers like they owed me money. Old files, conference swag, a drawer full of obsolete dongles and USBs, a pile of spiral-bound quarterly reports, their plastic covers warped from years of coffee steam and fluorescent regret. And then I saw it, that report, last fiscal year's annual security audit, the one I fought with David about. I remembered every exchange, every meeting where he brushed off my questions about international remittances and unattached transfers. He'd said, "It's all above board, just not your board." The words had made my skin crawl. I pulled it out of the pile. My own notes in the margins, a tabbed section I remembered obsessing over. Payments to a consultancy firm in Belize that had 3 employees and a website made in 2006. I'd questioned it loudly. David had smiled and said, "Some things are too high up for us to stress about." But taped to the inside cover, almost comically cheerful, was a neon yellow sticky note I hadn't noticed before. "Thanks for all your diligence." Winking face with tongue. M. Below it, a string of characters, C1V4X3R7.12 BTC. I blinked. At the time, I remembered asking him what it was. He'd said, "Password for my fantasy football league. Don't worry, nothing nefarious. Unless you think Tom Brady is laundering cash." I hadn't laughed then. I sure as hell didn't laugh now. My first instinct was to chuck it in the shredder. But something about that winky face, it felt smug, like a challenge, like a breadcrumb. I held the note up to the light. The ink was slightly smeared, like he'd written it quickly without thought. But David never wrote without thought. Everything he did was calculated. Every compliment, every coffee, every condescending pat on the back. I'd once seen him change a slide font 3 times in a pitch deck to get the emotional tone right. No, this wasn't random. It was a message, a placeholder, a leak in the pipe. My laptop pinged another rejection email. I didn't even look. Instead, I typed the string into Google. No quotes, No filters, just the raw text. At first, nothing. Then a strange link. Something called blockchain.info. A public ledger. Rows and rows of transactions, dates, amounts, wallet addresses. My heartbeat slowed. I wasn't sure what I was looking at yet, but that wasn't fantasy football. And it sure as hell wasn't harmless. I stared at the string again, my pulse rising. This wasn't a password. It was a trailhead, and David had just handed me the map. It started as a petty act of spite, something to give my mind a bone to chew while the rest of me unraveled. I never expected the string to lead anywhere real. At most, I figured it was a dumb inside joke. Maybe a real password to David's fantasy league, where he probably drafted CEOs instead of quarterbacks. But when I clicked that blockchain link and saw the address tied to actual transactions, thousands of them, my stomach dropped like I'd swallowed a brick. There it was. Wallet, C1V4X3R7.2 BTC. Balance, 8,142.77 BTC. I stared, refreshed the page. Current value in USD, 236,447, 211.13. I didn't move. Not at first. My eyes just locked on the screen, trying to translate the numbers into something human, something graspable. But that wasn't graspable. That was obscene. That was buy an island and hire a chef to butter your toes money. And it was sitting in a public wallet right there, naked in the digital sun, like it wasn't laundering the soul of someone I used to respect. I started clicking, drilling down. Each transaction was time-stamped, some tiny fractions of a Bitcoin like a test or a breadcrumb. Others, massive. The biggest one I found was from 5 months ago. A transfer of 1,000 BTC from a wallet that had been dormant since 2019. My brain switched into audit mode. I opened a folder on my external drive labeled Compliance Stuff Do Not Delete. Inside, a graveyard of PDFs, spreadsheets, reconciliations. David had once joked I was a hoarder with a badge. Well, it turns out hoarding was about to make me dangerous. I pulled up an expense report from Q2. Something nagged at me. Those vendor payments I argued with David about. The ones filed under foreign partnership initiatives. There were multiple transfers in April, May, and July, each for round, padded numbers. None of them had clear invoices. David said it was standard practice for emerging market outreach. I checked the blockchain, matched the dates. My fingers started to tremble. Bingo. April 12th, $900,000. April 13th, 13, BTC transferred. May 4th, $1.2 million. May 5, 17 BTC transferred. I clicked back and forth, my mouth dry. It wasn't perfect one-to-one timing, but it was close enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. Close enough to smell intent. Someone had moved money, my company's money, into crypto within 24 hours of it leaving their internal books. I opened another file, an internal memo I wrote 6 months ago, raising questions about duplicated payment entries to a shell vendor in Panama. David had replied with his usual sleight of hand. It's internal cost shielding for tax optimization. Don't worry, legal is in the loop. Translation: shut up and stop digging. But now I was digging, and the deeper I went, the filthier it got. The wallet had made over 400 transactions in the last year alone. All outbound, no inbound funds, no payments for services, no returns. Just quiet, steady siphoning into the digital void. The shell vendors I'd questioned. I Googled the names again. The Belize firm, Dubai consultant. One listed address was a burned-out laundromat. Another belonged to a bakery that hadn't updated its Facebook page since 2014. My chest tightened. This wasn't sloppy. This was calculated. I was never too inflexible. I was just inconvenient, too observant, too precise. David didn't fire me for creating friction. He fired me because I got too close to the spark. I scrolled to the sticky note again. That damn winky face wasn't a joke. It was a flex. He thought I'd throw it away, that I'd walk out with my mug and my dignity and never look back. But I looked, and now I saw it all. The lies, the laundering, the scale. My hands finally steadied, not from calm, but from purpose. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about office politics or bruised egos. It was about millions being funneled through a machine I helped maintain. I'd spent years keeping their systems clean. Turns out I was polishing a pig. A rush of adrenaline hit my veins like a second heartbeat, sharp, cold, focused. He thought I was out of the game. But now I was loading the gun. I sat in the dark, the only light in my apartment coming from the blue glow of my monitor and the occasional flicker of passing headlights against the blinds. My face was blank, but my eyes were alive, darting between folders, piecing together the anatomy of betrayal like a forensic pathologist with a scalpel and a grudge. On the screen, a single sentence stared back at me. Delete folder blockchain corruption leads permanently? I hovered my mouse over yes. One click, one tiny, merciful act of digital amnesia, and it would all vanish. The wallet address, the forensic breadcrumb trail, the shell companies with the personality of empty parking lots. I could go back to applying for jobs I didn't want and pretending the scar on my career was just bad luck. No one would know, except I would, and so would David. And he'd keep smiling, that reptilian smile at galas and board meetings, shaking hands with politicians, lecturing interns about ethics, all while moving dirty money through the pipes I once helped seal. He'd go on being untouchable, the kind of man who rewarded loyalty with a pink slip and called it professional evolution. I closed the prompt, opened a new tab, and typed slowly, methodically. ProtonMail.com. I needed encryption, discretion, an identity no one could tie to Ariana Sanchez, former senior data analyst, favorite sacrificial lamb of a man whose cufflinks cost more than my monthly rent. New email created. Seraphim.audit, protonmail.com. I smiled. Seraphim, angels with too many eyes. Fitting. Next, I opened a blank Word document and began typing. Not a rant, not a revenge note, a report. Structured, cold, bullet-pointed, with exhibits and timestamps and annotated screenshots. If someone at the DOJ or SEC so much as glanced at this, they'd break into a sweat. I titled the document, Whistleblower Submission, Suspected Fraud, Money Laundering, Tax Evasion by Redacted Corporation Executive Malfeasance. I had receipts, payment records, flagged discrepancies, internal memos David had signed with the same careless charm he used when texting middle-aged women from his burner phone during lunch breaks. I'd been called too inflexible for noticing the rot, and now that inflexibility was being weaponized. My meticulousness would become his noose. Every slide I made, every citation I linked, made me feel more alive than I had in weeks. Rage was no longer a shapeless fog. It was a tool. It had edges. By 3:12 a.m., I had 3 documents. A full audit trail connecting offshore transactions to shell vendors. An internal communications log annotated to highlight evasive language and timeline manipulation. A PDF export of blockchain activity linked to known expense report anomalies. I saved them to an encrypted thumb drive, one of the old titanium ones I used to mock other people for keeping just in case. Turns out, just in case was now. Then came the email body, simple, unemotional. To whom it may concern, please find attached documentation detailing financial activity that I believe constitutes criminal fraud, money laundering, and regulatory evasion by a senior executive at Redacted Corporation. The materials have been anonymized to protect my identity. I am willing to cooperate if granted legal protections under applicable whistleblower laws. The behavior outlined in the attachments poses a substantial risk to shareholders, regulators, and the broader public trust. I urge your office to review the evidence promptly. Seraphim. I reread it 3 times. No flourishes, no emotion, just the loaded weight of truth wrapped in legal precision. I didn't send it yet, not because I was unsure, because this moment deserved stillness. A pause before ignition. I stood up, walked to my window, lit a cigarette, though I hadn't smoked in years. It tasted like rebellion and bad choices and teenage anger. Perfect. Below, the city was still awake. Somewhere, David was probably sipping Scotch neat, sleeping like a man who believed in his own immunity. Let him. I turned back to my laptop, hit send, and closed the lid. I had been the loyal soldier. Now I was the arsonist, and the match was lit. The next morning felt like the hangover after detonating a bomb in your own house. I woke up on the couch, laptop still warm on my thighs. My neck kinked at an angle that felt like a punishment. My inbox had no replies, no confirmation, just silence. The kind that's thick with uncertainty and the faint stink of fear. Had it worked? Was anyone even going to see it? That question nagged at me like a dog on a bone. The federal government wasn't exactly known for its speed or its warmth. I imagined my email bouncing around some government firewall purgatory, flagged as spam or worse, passed over by an underpaid intern with 200 unread messages and a hangover from their Hill internship mixer. No, that wouldn't do. I needed more than a sent folder and a prayer. I knew the system. I'd lived inside its ribcage for years. If I was going to bring down a man like David, the golden child of a company with friends in expensive places, I had to play smarter. Not just fire the bullet, aim it. So I brewed the strongest coffee I could stomach and started digging. Not in spreadsheets this time, but in the bureaucracy itself. How to report white-collar financial crimes to DOJ? SEC Whistleblower Anonymous Tips. Form Whistleblower Protections. Crypto Laundering IRS. Will the government actually read my evidence or just archive it in a sad PDF graveyard? Hours vanished. My browser history began to look like the fever dream of a paranoid data analyst crossed with a vigilante librarian. Turns out, it wasn't enough to just send an email. If I wanted to really make it stick, I needed to submit a formal tip through the right portals. That meant the Office of the Whistleblower at the SEC, using Form TCR, tips, complaints, and referrals, and maybe loop in the Criminal Division's fraud section at the DOJ, which had its own protocol buried 6 layers deep in a site that hadn't been updated since the Bush administration. Every form wanted summaries and wanted document uploads in very specific file types. One warned about false statements under penalty of perjury. Another offered a tiny checkbox. Do you wish to remain anonymous? Followed by 4 pages of disclaimers that practically screamed, "Good luck with that." My paranoia kicked in. I downloaded a VPN, rerouted my IP, created a second Proton mail just for correspondence, then another one just in case. I scrubbed metadata from every document, checked every PDF for embedded author tags, even stripped fonts and replaced them manually to erase my fingerprint. At one point, I sat frozen for a full minute, staring at the question, how did you become aware of the wrongdoing? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The truth felt radioactive. I finally typed. I worked in a technical capacity within the organization and identified irregularities during routine reconciliation. Vague enough to mask me, sharp enough to be taken seriously. I attached the dossier, double-checked every file, renamed them in plain, boring legalese. No drama, no flair. This was not a revenge fantasy. It was a legal missile. Then came the DOJ portal. A clunky HTML monstrosity that required you to select from 20 dropdowns before it even let you type a sentence. I crafted a condensed version of my report and dropped in a secure cloud link to the full dossier. I also included a read-only blockchain ledger summary just in case the intern skimming it didn't know how to translate crypto to crime. My hands were trembling again, not from fear, from pressure, from the weight of doing this right, or no redos. No Control+Z for blowing the whistle on someone who probably had lawyers on retainer and friends with vacation homes in Geneva. I hit submit twice, once for the SEC, once for the DOJ. Each time I was rewarded with a depressingly minimalist confirmation message. Your submission has been received. No further contact is guaranteed. That was it. No case number, no handler, no dramatic phone call with someone from the Treasury Department whispering, "We've been waiting for you." Just more silence. I leaned back in my chair. The room was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat echo in my jaw. I'd followed every rule. I'd navigated the maze. Now I had to wait and trust. And trusting was the part that felt most foreign. Still, I locked away my drive, deleted my temp accounts, the thumb drive in a hollowed-out volume of Principles of Corporate Ethics, a gift from David once upon a time. Fitting, I thought. Let the system do what it was built to do. And if it didn't, I'd burn that down too. I thought the waiting would feel like relief. I'd imagined myself exhaling, maybe even sleeping through the night like someone who'd finally handed the cursed object to someone else's problem pile. Instead, it was like holding my breath underwater while checking the surface every 5 minutes to see if the lifeguard had noticed I was drowning. The first day after submission, I hovered near my phone like it might suddenly ring with an unknown number from DC. Some calm, competent voice saying, "We got it, we're moving." Instead, I got spam. A robocall from someone trying to sell me solar panels. A text from CVS reminding me about my flu shot. No government van, no black sedans, no sirens in the distance. Just me and my increasingly raw nerves. I refreshed the news tabs obsessively. Google alerts set up for the company, for David's name, even for terms like financial fraud investigation and crypto seizure. Nothing. The world kept spinning like I hadn't just thrown a live grenade into the center of a billion-dollar machine. Day 2, I took a walk. My body needed air. I ended up outside the company's headquarters downtown. From across the street, it looked untouched. Sleek glass walls, clean signage, employees going in and out like it was just another Tuesday in the empire. I stood there for 10 full minutes, wondering how many of them knew they were working inside a crime scene. Then, day 3, that's when I saw the photo. A local business journal had posted a recap from a glitzy charity gala the night before. The headline was some soulless corporate fluff. Leaders rally for clean energy initiative at downtown soiree. But there, buried 4 photos in, was David. Tuxedo. Smile. Holding a glass of champagne, like he'd never broken a single rule in his life. One hand on the back of a woman I didn't recognize. The other lifted mid-toast. The caption read, "David M., keynote donor, honored for his commitment to corporate sustainability." My stomach twisted so fast I nearly dropped my phone. I stared at the screen like it might glitch and reveal the truth, like someone would Photoshop in handcuffs or FBI windbreakers in the background. But no, there he was, thriving, toasting, posing for cameras like the walls weren't covered in blood. I nearly threw the phone across the room. Instead, I opened my encrypted inbox, just in case, again. I'd already checked it 16 times that day, but this time it was a single new message. No subject line, sent from a government address masked through layers of routing. The body was 4 words long. Materials received, under review. That was it. No signature, no timeline, no questions. Just enough to confirm I hadn't screamed into a void. Someone, somewhere, had opened my file. Maybe read it, maybe even printed it. But it was the maybe that drove me mad. because now the clock had restarted, but this time the ticking wasn't in my control. I was no longer the analyst or the architect. I was the observer, the one hoping someone in a starched government office would care enough to chase the threads I'd laid out in ink and ash. I sat back on my bed, laptop resting on my stomach. That 4-word email burned into my retinas. Under review. I hated how fragile it made me feel. How powerless, like being told you might be believed, only if the paperwork doesn't get lost and the right intern doesn't call in sick. I thought of David in that tuxedo, laughing, toasting, oblivious. I imagined the photo again, but this time, the background is lit up with blue lights and handcuffs are clicking behind his back. I closed my eyes and let the rage settle, slow and thick in my blood. This wasn't over, but for now, I had to wait. And waiting, as it turned out, was its own private hell. I had gone feral in my own kitchen. I was wearing an old university hoodie with coffee stains I couldn't date and socks that didn't match. The counter was littered with half-eaten toast, an open can of cold ravioli I never actually touched, and 3 used tea bags that hadn't been steeped so much as drowned. I was on my 4th cup of coffee, store brand, aggressively bitter, brewed into the same chipped mug I'd used the night I was fired. The mug said, "World's okayest analyst." It felt ironic now, almost prophetic. I sat hunched over my laptop like a gargoyle guarding the gates of paranoia, my tabs still arranged in their obsessive grid. SEC to tips page, DOJ newswire, LinkedIn to stalk David's connections, Google alerts, Reddit, in case someone posted an anonymous "my CEO just got raided" thread, and my encrypted email account, still stubbornly unread since the 4-word message of doom. I didn't know what I was expecting. A banner headline, a leak, a whistleblower forum post. Maybe just the universe cracking open and whispering, "You were right." Instead, it came from a local news aggregator site I only bookmarked to monitor crime reports near my apartment. I was about to scroll past a photo of yellow tape and a blurred logo when the words hit me straight in the chest. Breaking: DOJ raids downtown tech firm in multi-million-dollar financial investigation. I didn't breathe, didn't blink, just clicked. The page loaded slower than anything had ever loaded in the history of the internet. Every second stretched like punishment. The article was short, but it didn't need to be long. In a surprise move early this morning, agents from the Department of Justice executed a search and seizure warrant at Redacted Corporation's downtown headquarters. Witnesses described federal officers removing computers, servers, and multiple boxes of financial records. A spokesperson from the DOJ declined to comment on the ongoing investigation, but confirmed that the raid pertains to significant financial irregularities, potentially involving cryptocurrency laundering through offshore entities. I skimmed, my eyes scanning for the one thing I needed, proof it was my company, that it was him. There it was. Sources close to the matter say the investigation centers on a high-ranking executive believed to have been involved in redirecting company funds through third-party vendors and digital assets. No arrests have been made at this time. No name, but it didn't have to be. I sat motionless. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't care. I read the article again and again. Each time it hit differently. Not joy. No, this wasn't joy. This was deeper, older. A slow-spreading, visceral vindication that settled in my bones like heat from a fire I'd built with my own 2 hands. The DOJ raided them. They took servers, the kind that don't lie, the kind that hold receipts and secrets and backup logs David probably thought were safe behind 3 VPNs and a cocky grin. He must have walked into work that morning thinking it was just another Monday. I imagined it, him halfway through a coffee order, maybe schmoozing in the lobby, maybe talking about agility in the tech landscape when someone in a windbreaker tapped his shoulder and said, "Sir, we need you to come with us." A small, sharp sound escaped my lips. Not laughter, not a sob. More like a dry exhale, that had been waiting behind my ribs for days. I refreshed the article again. A new photo had been added. Agents wheeling out a cart with 3 server towers wrapped in plastic. Company logo blurred in the corner. One of the towers had a neon orange tag zip-tied to it, hand-labeled Seized Evidence. I stared at it. That was the server. The one they'd used for quarterly data mirroring and encrypted transaction backups. I knew it. I'd reviewed its retention policies. David had once called it the Fort Knox of compliance. Turns out, Fort Knox was made of wet cardboard and hubris. I didn't call anyone, didn't post, didn't scream. I just sat there, very still, feeling the full weight of what I'd done sink in. It had worked. I had worked. I'd torn out a monster's spine and handed it, still pulsing, to the people who could crush it. No fireworks, no thank you letter, just a quiet headline. And it was enough. The news anchor was smiling because they always smiled, even when reading about death or fire, or in this case, federal raids. I sat curled up on my couch, knees to my chest, the sound on low, the captions on. I didn't need to hear it. I knew every syllable of what they were going to say before they said it. Ongoing investigation into financial misconduct, including the seizure of an offshore cryptocurrency server allegedly tied to fraudulent payments and asset misappropriation. There it was. Offshore cryptocurrency server. Clean, clinical, the kind of phrase that only meant something if you'd followed the blood trail. Then the screen cut to a photo. David, not a mugshot yet, just his headshot from the company's press kit. Still smiling like a man who thought the game was rigged in his favor, because until 3 days ago, it was. I paused the screen. He looked smug, frozen in that corporate grin with the eyes that always said, "I know better, but I'll let you speak." For years that face had hovered over boardroom tables and security reviews and late-night Slack calls that always ended with, "You're a rock star, Ariana. Don't overthink it." I hadn't overthought it. I'd underestimated him until now. My coffee was lukewarm. I took a sip anyway. Let the bitterness roll over my tongue like ash. Difficult. That's what he'd called me. Too inflexible. Creates friction. Not disloyal, not wrong, just difficult. I was difficult for him. Difficult to gaslight, difficult to distract, difficult to silence. He'd wanted me gone, not because I was incompetent, but because I was inconvenient. A splinter in his well-oiled machine. A warning sign with a heartbeat. And like any good predator in a corner office, he treated me like a problem to be eliminated. Quietly, politely, with a pat on the back and a pink slip covered in HR perfume. Except I hadn't gone quietly. I'd stayed in the fire, walked barefoot through every file folder and burnt bridge until my hands found the wires underneath. I set the coffee down and opened my laptop. My encrypted email, seraphimaudit@protonmail.com, still unread since that 4-word reply. I stared at the inbox for a moment, then clicked Settings, scrolled to the bottom, and hit Delete Account. It was done. I closed the tab, opened a blank document. Title: Resume. Ariana Sanchez, Technical Risk Executive. I stared at the blinking cursor. It didn't taunt me this time. I'd have to reframe everything, strip out the obvious, speak in subtext. Spearheaded internal risk analysis during international restructuring. Led forensic reconciliation project identifying systemic vendor anomalies. All true, all coded. The real story would live between the lines, in the silence, in the knowing tilt of my smile if anyone asked. So why did you leave your last role? I started typing slowly, confidently. I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd had it. I'd been it. A one-woman audit with nothing left to lose and no patience for men who built empires out of fraud and foam. David would be indicted, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this week, but it was inevitable now. The DOJ didn't raid your servers for fun. The IRS didn't ignore untraceable payments once the pattern became visible. The SEC didn't shrug off a whistleblower dossier with 4 separate spreadsheets and a color-coded laundering trail so clear even a summer intern could follow it. And me? I'd rebuild. Not softer, not smaller, smarter. Somewhere in the dim quiet of my apartment, a smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was dangerous. And this time, I liked it. The lesson here is that integrity is not a weakness, and attention to detail is not a flaw. Sometimes, the things that make you difficult in a toxic environment are the very strengths that will empower you to do what is right. Don't be afraid to be the one who asks the hard questions and refuses to let things slide, because your honesty and persistence can bring the truth to light, no matter how powerful the lies are. The system is flawed, but you have the power to fix it.